What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. First and foremost, I want to say a huge thank you to you guys for all the support for not just my video and the case, but also the two different organizations that I spoke about last week. So far, we've raised about $1,200, a little over that dollars, for the Innocence Project, which I am so happy about, you guys. I'm actually going to be covering a case that the Innocence Project is involved in, I think, next week. And then I'm not exactly sure what's happening analytics-wise with my video, where all the proceeds will be going to Color of Change, but it was fully monetized, and I never thought that was going to happen, so I'm very excited about that. But before we dive into today's video, I need to say a huge thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. As I always state, we speak about safety on this channel, and especially right now, internet safety is so incredibly important. We constantly live on the internet, and I feel like for some reason there's like this disconnection where we believe that we are safe if we are browsing the internet or doing anything through our own personal devices. Now, NordVPN is actually an award-winning virtual private network that helps to protect your identity and all of your personal information while you are browsing online. It can protect things like passwords, credit card information, anything that you may have entered and kept within your laptop or your phone or your tablet that someone could sneak in and grab. It makes sure it is protected. You can use NordVPN while you are personally browsing at home, or while you are out and about browsing, while you are traveling in airports, coffee shops, anywhere you go where you are using the internet. And it's also really awesome because there's a Chrome browser extension on it, which essentially makes it as easy as like one click. So it's not complicated at all. If you've ever been a victim of identity theft, you know that it is absolutely no joke. And right now, NordVPN is offering my subscribers 70% off, making their services only $3.49 a month. And that is nothing compared to what you normally go through when someone has taken your identity or taken some of your personal information online. Plus, they will also give you guys an additional month for free if you go to nordvpn.com/Danielle and use code Danielle at checkout. Thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive right on it. Now, today's video is one that has been on my mind for the absolute longest time. I have this thing, again, you guys know, with cold cases. Like, if I had the opportunity to go into like a line of work where I could like choose in the true crime community or the justice system what I wanted to do, it would be looking into cold cases, being on a cold case team, or looking into wrongful accusations, something like the Innocence Project. And something about cold cases just drives me mad. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're usually closed for so long, there's no answers for so long, that a lot of their family members end up passing away, their parents end up passing away, having absolutely no idea what happened to their loved one. And this is literally a prime example of that. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that this young woman had a space on my channel where her name remained. And that's why today I'll be talking about the murder of Katherine Kolodziej. Katherine was 17 years old when her body was found in the middle of a field on November 27th, 1974. So this case has been ongoing for a very, very long time. All these years later, unfortunately, most of her direct family has passed away. Her parents passed away, having no clue who killed her, no closure whatsoever. She was their only child, so they basically lost their entire world the day that they lost Kathy. And by the way, Kathy's what she was referred to. So they lost their entire world when they lost Kathy, and they never, ever, ever got any answers. She does have an uncle who is still, from what I have seen, still alive and still occasionally checking in on the case. The only other person that makes sure that the case is constantly checked up on is one of her roommates from college where all of this happened. And she calls, I believe, twice a year. And then the investigators. And these investigators on this case, and every investigator that's ever touched this case, has gone above and beyond to try to find answers of what exactly happened to her and to keep her name out there, knowing that they are some of the only people who are now capable of really pushing to do that. So Kathy grew up on Long Island with both of her parents. She was the only child. She was always very, very quiet. She was very reserved, a very strict rule follower, but she was also very kind to absolutely everybody. She had just had this like calm sweetness about her. And I'm sure you guys know exactly the kind of person that I'm talking about. They don't really make themselves known. They don't stand out too much, but she just was sweet and kind and quiet, and very to herself. Now, 2 months prior to her death, she ended up moving away from her childhood home to Cobleskill, New York to attend Cobleskill SUNY. It was going to be a pretty big move for her and a pretty big deal. She was used to being obviously in her childhood home. She was used to being with her parents, and she, from what I've seen, wasn't the kind of person to really like branch out and do anything crazy. So this was a very new experience, and she was very excited. From what I've seen, she was going to be studying like equine science. Most of the school seems to be very much focused on agriculture. I know they have like a giant study on dairy cows, and there's just a whole lot going on there. It's like a very small, close-knit town that is mainly farmland. And so it was still not going to be absolutely too crazy from what she was used to. She was still going to somewhere relatively calm, relatively close-knit, and relaxed. So it should have been a really, really great fit for her. She was very, very dedicated to her schooling from the get-go, which is not surprising given her personality, and she was also known to be a very responsible young woman. She was 17 years old at the time, but she didn't go out much, she didn't party too much, she didn't drink too much, and even when it came to just going out for a little bit, she would always tell her friends where she was going or her roommate who she was going to be with, what time she would come back. She was a creature of habit. Like, she made sure everyone knew what she was doing at all times and that she was safe. That's even if she really went out and did anything without her friends to begin with. But on the night of November 1st, Kathy did decide to go out to the little downtown area in Cobleskill to have a fun night with her friends and her roommate. As I said, Cobleskill was very small, and this downtown area is not like a downtown you're picturing. I'll probably have a picture of it up here. Very small. There were only a handful of restaurants and bars, so it's not like she could have gotten lost in the middle of downtown. It was pretty much downtown was one road, essentially. And Kathy and her friends ended up going to a place called The Vault, which was probably the most popular bar for most of the students at Cobleskill SUNY. They were having a great time from all accounts. They were having a great night, laughing, dancing. They met a couple of guys. They were hanging out with them, dancing with them. They did have a few drinks. Keep in mind that the drinking age at this time was, I think, 18. Now, I don't believe, again, Kathy was 18. I seen her age was 17 across the board, but she still, I believe, also had drinks. I don't want to state that as 100% fact because I'm not positive. I've just seen it said they had a few drinks. So they ended up hanging out until around 1:30 in the morning, and Kathy's friends and roommate decided they wanted to go ahead and head back to the dorms for the night, but Kathy said that she wanted to stay there with her friend. I have not seen anywhere who she stayed with. It seems like the group she came with all left together. So I don't know if this is just a friend that happened to be there that she knew from classes, or maybe it was one of the guys that they met there. But she said she would return back to the dorm later. She just still wanted to hang out for a while. But Kathy never came back to the dorm room. Her roommate immediately knew something was wrong. As I said, creature of habit, always told everyone where she was going to be. She was on time, exactly when she said she'd be there. So this immediately was a red flag. Kathy's roommate called her mom just to let her know that they couldn't find her, and her mom, just like her roommate, knew immediately something is wrong. Kathy would never do this. She had never not shown up when she said she would before, so she immediately reported Kathy missing to the Duanesburg Police Department on November 2nd, 1974, and her husband immediately hopped into the car to head from Long Island to Cobleskill to figure out where on earth Kathy was. Authorities right off the bat were shocked. This was not the kind of thing that happened around Cobleskill. It was known to be a very safe, again, and relaxed, like farming, chilled out community. This was not the kind of thing that happened here. People didn't just go missing. They immediately went to the bar to question everyone that worked there that night and to figure out if anyone saw her leaving, and they were able to find out that Kathy actually left just 15 minutes after her friends left the bar. So I don't know if to me that indicates something happened or maybe the friend last minute decided to leave, but I feel like, I don't know, something about that timing just seems a little bit odd to me. But she was seen by witnesses at the vault leaving at 1:45 in the morning, and then I've also seen that there were witnesses across the street that also witnessed Kathy leave at 1:45 in the morning, and she was on foot by herself heading to the dorms. That was the direction she was heading in. Now, like I said, very small town, and the college was only 1 mile away from where the vault was. So she should have easily been able to get back to the school within around 30-ish minutes. But somehow, in that very short area, that very short distance, very short time frame, something happened that nobody saw and nobody heard. A woman came forward to police and offered up a tip that led them in their very first direction. The woman said that she woke up right around 1:45 in the morning, around the same time that Kathy would have been leaving the bar, and she said that she looked outside of her window and saw a young woman getting into a yellow Volkswagen and driving off. Now, from what I've seen, she didn't mention that there was a struggle and that's what woke her up. I think maybe she just heard a car or something. I'm not quite sure. I can't say for certain, but she woke up and saw this happen and then kind of went about her night. In this time period, hitchhiking was incredibly common. This was not something that was questioned. Nobody really saw it as being very unsafe. Usually, these college kids didn't have their own cars. Families at this point, usually it was one car per family, and that was it. So everyone kind of relied on using their parents' vehicle and getting somewhere, or, on the off chance one of the other students had a car, they would all pile into the one car and go back and forth, or they'd hitch a ride with someone. It was even also acceptable if you are, walking on the side of the street at any time pretty much of the day. If someone drives by and they see you walking, they'd be like, hey, you need a ride, like right up the road. It was just a normal thing. So this wasn't seen as too odd. However, authorities were wondering if maybe this was Kathy, and she had accepted a ride from someone with very bad intentions. They decided to go ahead and compile a list of everyone in the local area with a yellow Volkswagen. Now, I've seen it was a Volkswagen Bug. I've also seen it was possibly a bus. I'm not exactly sure which it was, but they questioned every single owner in the local area, at least, that had any type of yellow Volkswagen, and it never ended up resulting in any answers. Now, one thing I find odd about this is, and why I think it personally could very well be connected to this case, is that you would expect if this was just someone innocently picking someone up on the side of the road, whether to drop them off somewhere real quick, or maybe they're picking up their girlfriend or their sister, or, something along those lines, that this person would have, with this yellow Volkswagen, would have come forward and been like, oh yeah, sorry, that was just me picking up so-and-so. Like, I didn't pick up Kathy that night. This is completely unrelated. However, because not a single owner of a yellow Volkswagen came forward admitting that, it really, in my mind, solidifies that something about that absolutely must have had something to do with Kathy's disappearance. Now, the FBI and the CBI immediately became involved in the case, and authorities decided to direct their attention towards the school because they ended up spending so much time on this idea that this yellow Volkswagen was possibly their answer, but it wasn't yielding any information, that they were kind of dismissing other theories. Not totally dismissing them, they just were very hyper-focused on this yellow Volkswagen, and they realized it wasn't getting them anywhere, so like, all right, we've got to at least try something else. So they questioned the entire student body, basically, of Cobleskill SUNY. They also questioned multiple members of the staff. Basically, if you had any contact with Kathy at all, if you lived around her, if you had a class with her, if you had spoken with her, even like one time, if you had walked past her, seen her, that you were questioned in her disappearance. I know that some of the staff was in fact taken to, I think, either some facility or police department between Cobleskill and Albany to get polygraphed. Over 3,000 people total were questioned. And at the time, that was half of Cobleskill population. So literally over half of the community of Cobleskill was questioned in regards to her disappearance. But unfortunately, despite all of this, authorities didn't seem to get any tips, any leads, any answers at all. Then on November 27th, 26 days after her disappearance, 2 hunters ended up finding a blue shoe in Richmondville, New York at the intersection of McDonald and Cross Hill Road. And the last thing that Kathy was seen wearing was a big red winter jacket and blue shoes, like baby blue shoes. this location where this one singular shoe was found, I believe it was the left shoe, was about 5 to 7 miles away from where Kathy was last seen at the vault. And on a map, if I'm remembering correctly, I haven't looked at the map in a while now, I believe it only is like 2 turns away, maybe 3, from where Kathy was seen. So it was really not that far from where she was last seen. However, it was also heading the opposite direction away from the school. The media had pretty heavily covered Kathy's case. They really put a lot of pushes out there because they were thinking someone had to have seen something. It's a mile walk. It's a college town. It was only 1:45 in the morning. Lots of people were out and about. It was a weekend. There had to be someone who saw something. And that is how these hunters actually knew that this blue shoe had to have belonged to Kathy. When this was found, authorities decided to go ahead and gather up a search team to search the following day to look for any other signs of Kathy and to look for Kathy herself. When they went out the following morning to this area and they were kind of, getting themselves together, they ended up finding her other shoe not far away from the first one. And after they found that, they were approached by another hunter who had been in the field nearby where both of the shoes were found. This hunter said he also had watched the news and there was some type of red fabric clothing, something that he saw in the middle of the field, and he was worried that it was just another piece of evidence and he wanted authorities to know about it. So authorities hadn't even had a chance to start their search yet. They go over to check out this red piece of fabric the hunter saw, and it was Kathy. Kathy's jacket, the bright red jacket, and her body. Kathy had been very obviously, specifically, and carefully placed on a rock wall running through the middle of the field. It was a very short rock wall, and she wasn't just thrown there. It wasn't anything like that. Her body was not in a strange position. It was very obvious she had been purposefully put there the way that she was. She was naked from the waist down, but despite that, her jacket had been placed on her in a very odd way. It had been laid on top of her to cover up all of the areas where there were no longer any clothes, and there were even rocks on the jacket to weigh it down to, in my opinion, basically ensure that this jacket did not fly off of her and expose her body. When Kathy's body was examined, it was found that she had been stabbed 7 times in the back, which of course ended up being the cause of death. The wounds, however, were from 2 different kinds of weapons. Now, I'm assuming they're knives. However, I have not seen them state what exactly was used, what the 2 different kinds of weapons are. I'm assuming obviously to protect the integrity of the case because only the killer would probably know that information. But that is a lot. 7 stab wounds is a lot. 2 different weapons, that's a lot. And at this point, you have to keep in mind it's in the 70s. There is not a lot of heavy forensic testing, so they can't do DNA testing. They can't compare anything pretty much. I don't think they found the murder weapons from what I've seen. I don't even think they found the bottom half of her clothing from what I've seen. So they're pretty much left with just very basic investigative work. Everyone was devastated. Her family was devastated. Her mom had to come in and identify her. And I can't imagine what that must have felt like as a mother. That quite literally tears my heart out of my chest. And it wasn't even my experience. That's not even something that happened to me. And that's something that the detectives have said. The image of her identifying her daughter is something that has been burned into their brain permanently forever. At this point, they're trying to figure out, is this a crime that was committed by someone in this community that's thought to be so safe and, houses a school with lots of vulnerable young adults? Or was this someone that was just kind of passing through and saw a great opportunity and took it? With the community being as small as it was, a lot of people believed that, plus the fact that half the residents had been questioned, it seemed like someone local probably wasn't involved because people talk, rumors are spread, people notice if someone's acting weird, especially when this is not a common occurrence. People are hyper vigilant and sometimes can even assume the worst of people who are acting completely normal, but no one had really reported anything odd and no red flags really appeared. I know authorities have stated over the years, people will come forward and be like, now that I think about it, this person from the community was acting odd, and they'll go and have to chase down these people that have sometimes moved out of state, completely out of the area, but so far it's never amounted to anything. So they decided, since it didn't seem, it was impossible that it was someone local, but it didn't seem like they were getting anywhere with locals, they decided to look into someone from out of town, which led them to the idea of serial killers. Specifically, Ted Bundy, which I'm sure none of you are surprised at that, and a man named Louis Lint. Ted Bundy was on the list of possibilities for very obvious reasons. I'm sure the second I said a girl from a college was picked up by someone in a yellow Volkswagen, every single one of you was like Ted Bundy. And that's pretty much exactly why. It kind of fit his MO and they were curious. They also wanted to look into Louis Lint. He committed all of his crimes in Massachusetts and New York. However, he typically had a much younger victim. I think it was normally like 12, 13 years old. She did look very young, but definitely not 12 or 13 and somewhere around that age. But he would go around and drive back roads to look for his victims. So this also was a possibility. However, after thorough questioning of both of these men on multiple occasions, they ended up being ruled out. Years later, the next person that they looked into was a man from Mohawk Valley. This man's name was Donald Sigsbee, and they really thought he could have been connected. He was convicted in 2004 of the murder of 19-year-old Regina Reynolds. She was a college student. She was picked up by Sigsbee while hitchhiking, which is something that was, thought that possibly Kathy did. And this happened on November 6th, 1975, so almost exactly a year later, and this could have been a pattern. So they really believed this could be a possibility, but they ended up not finding a single thing to tie him to the crime. Then another man ended up being arrested, a man from Mohawk Valley, the same as Sigsbee from before, and this man's name was John William Hopkins, who is now known as the Mohawk Valley Ripper. Hopkins was from a place called Johnstown, which was about an hour north of Cobleskill, and he had been arrested in 1979, so just a few years after this occurred, for the sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. Now, this young woman was abducted while she was walking on the side of the road in Northville, New York. Hopkins took her home, and what he did with this girl is so disturbing. He took her home, and then he tied her up between two rafters, two posts in the attic. He sexually assaulted this 15-year-old girl for an entire day, and then the following day, he decided to take her out to the woods in the middle of nowhere with full intentions of killing her. Hopkins proceeded to gag this 15-year-old girl and stab her in the back, but what he didn't know is that a logger was nearby, and he was watching this happen and was basically running to help this young woman, and it scared Hopkins away, so he ran. What he also didn't know is that this 15-year-old girl survived the attack, and she was able to be taken to the hospital for treatment and was able to provide authorities with a description of the man, the house that she was at, everything like that, and it led them straight to Hopkins, and he was arrested. Now, while that seemed like it may have been an isolated incident and they weren't expecting this to happen, as soon as they sat him down to question him, he says, "Oh yeah, by the way, this isn't the first time I've done this. I've actually killed 3 other young women." But he only gave the identities of the first 2 and left the third one a mystery, and authorities could not get this information out of him. The first murder victim was a 17-year-old girl named Cecilia Genetiempo. She was abducted in July of 1976 outside of Johnstown, so the town that Hopkins lived in. She was abducted at knife point, so we have a knife again, and she had been walking along the road after leaving a donut shop. So again, just kind of a way you wouldn't expect someone to be abducted. I don't know if this was in the middle of broad daylight, but he managed to make it happen. She ended up being found in the woods by hunters the following fall, and she had died from multiple stab wounds. So again, the same circumstances, a different young woman. The second murder victim was 17-year-old Sherry Ann Carville. October 22nd, 1978, she was abducted from, get this, outside of a bar in Johnstown. This time, Hopkins decided to dispose of her body on family-owned property, and I don't believe her body was found until he led authorities to it. I don't think anyone had any idea it was there. I think her case was still open. No body had been found until this information was handed over by him. Now, because there was this third victim that he stated existed but would not give the identity of, authorities believed, what if Kathy's the third victim? But they started to wonder, why on earth would he not name the third victim? He named the other two. We don't understand. Sometimes that's like a game serial killers and different killers play to feel like they're still winning, like they're still playing part of their game. But also, I personally wonder if maybe the way her body was, the way that it had been covered, despite the fact that someone killed her, someone stabbed her. From the perspective of the killer, covering the body like that almost seems like it was their attempt at respecting the body. Like there was a line that they weren't willing to cross. So I wonder personally if she was the third victim, if he didn't name her because there was something different about her murder, if there was something special about what happened with her. That sounds so gross saying that. I don't want my words to be misconstrued, but sometimes serial killers and other killers will have a victim that they have some odd, messed up attachment with, and this could fit that bill. However, in 2007, the third victim was thought to be found, and it was not Kathy. Joanne Pachone was 19 years old, living in East Utica. On January 12th, 1972, she was taking a usual path that she took through the woods on the way to her family home, and unfortunately, she ran into Hopkins while on this trail. A young boy was also using this trail to snowmobile, and he ended up passing by and witnessing the attack on Joanne. He fled the scene and alerted authorities, but by the time authorities got there, Joanne had already been killed. Now, this case also remained very cold for a very long time. All those years later, in 2007, a prosecutor from Oneida County was looking into cold cases and realized that he saw something very, very important. He was the cousin of Sherry Ann Carville, so the second victim of Hopkins, and he noticed similarities between what happened to his cousin and Joanne's cold case. And he suggested that maybe these cases were linked and Joanne was the third victim. It took until 2011, I'm not quite sure why, to get an answer as to if Hopkins was in fact Joanne's killer and Joanne was the third victim. That remained unnamed. They initially tried to connect Hopkins through DNA. They had found DNA on Joanne, but again, at that time period, DNA testing wasn't a thing, but by the time they were comparing it all those years later, I don't know if it had degraded or what happened, but the results came back inconclusive. So they then are trying to find another way to potentially connect Hopkins to Joanne's murder. Ended up finding the sketch that the young boy had helped the police create when he first saw who the attacker was. And when they compared that to a picture of Hopkins at the same time, the same year, they were pretty much identical, but that wasn't quite enough, so they wanted to make sure they found just a little bit more. This is when they stumbled upon the clothing description that the young boy also gave of what this attacker was wearing. It perfectly matched what Hopkins was known to wear when he committed these murders, the other two murders. Fit to a T. I'm guessing he wore the exact same outfit every single time, and the little boy was even able to describe the boots that Hopkins had on. And then they remembered they had a footprint, like a print of the bottom of a shoe that they had from Joanne's murder, and it perfectly matched the shoes that were worn for the murders of the other two young women. So authorities at this point basically concluded they were confident enough in what they had found to say that Joanne was in fact Hopkins' third victim. Now, a lot of people question this. First of all, some people were concerned because there really was not that much physical evidence connecting Joanne to Hopkins, that they weren't sure authorities had really found her killer. There also were a lot of people that were like, yeah, this could be the third killer, but we still believe that Kathy was potentially killed by Hopkins. He admitted to 3, but who's to say there weren't more? How many times has a serial killer or even someone who's just murdered like 1 or 2 times said that they only had a certain amount of victims and it's been proven to be so much more? What you have to remember is these people are playing their own sort of sick and twisted game. They're not going to give up everything. While they do seem to get this strange joy out of slowly leaking information to authorities and that being presented to the public, typically they're not going to tell all of their secrets. So some thought, he probably had more murders. We highly doubt he only did this 3 times. Maybe she is still possibly one of his victims. However, in 2000, years prior, they had lost the ability to ask Hopkins any more questions because he ended his own life while in jail, pretty much very shortly after he was put in there. So this brings us to the theories. Now, authorities have stated the last I have seen that they believe she was in fact taken by someone in a vehicle, either willingly or unwillingly, somewhere along that 1-mile walk. They then believe that she was attacked and disposed of, and I have not seen them state anything more than that at all. Probably because, again, they do not have a lot of information in this case and they need to protect the integrity of the few more detail-oriented bits of information that they have. Many still believe, like I said just a few minutes ago, that Hopkins is responsible for the death of Kathy, despite the fact that he said he only had 3 victims and all 3 victims are thought to be accounted for. He had stabbed his victims in the back, which lines up with what happened to Kathy. He was known by friends as someone who would travel around to different colleges. This really makes me feel like he had other victims that are just not known. The women that he was known to murder, he picked up, on trails or the side of the road or outside of a bar, and this seemed to kind of perfectly fit the areas that Kathy had been in that they know of. But authorities seem to have exhausted all options of connecting Hopkins to the murder, so I don't know if that is ever something they are going to be able to prove. I think if they had DNA at this point that they could test, they would have stated that. Maybe it came back inconclusive, but even then I would assume that they would state that as well. But to me, it really does seem plausible that he could have been involved in Kathy's murder. He did drive a Chevy Nova, so that doesn't necessarily match up to the car thought to have potentially abducted or taken Kathy, but again, that's not been confirmed, so I think just because of that doesn't mean he couldn't have been there. And all of his friends said he always had a thing for knives. And that one statement kind of got to me a lot because I've been thinking a lot, and I'll get more into it in a little bit, about like the fact that 2 knives were used, and maybe that was fun for him. Maybe he wanted to see the damage that 2 different knives could do if he's always had an obsession with them. In my mind, that kind of makes a little bit of sense. And who else is going to have more than 1 knife on them? Other than someone who just like has a thing for knives. Now, I also saw a lot of very interesting conversations happening on Reddit, and a lot of them pointed out the state of her body, which I completely understand because that was one of the very first things that got my attention and led me to a theory that I think is very, very possible. The way she was handled seemed like whoever did this to her, there was some sort of guilt, or there was at least some sort of connection there, because she was carefully placed on, the rock wall. She wasn't just thrown or dumped. Someone put time and effort to carefully place her. She also had been covered so that the portions of her that were not clothed were not showing. And then they, again, went as far as to place the rocks down on it to make sure that, this part of her wasn't showing. On the Reddit thread, someone also pointed out that stabbing someone in the back could be, indicative of someone feeling shame, feeling bad about what they are doing. And you usually see situations like that again where someone doesn't want to look someone in the face while it's happening, which sometimes will happen when the attacker knows the victim. They do not want to see the reaction on their face, knowing that they, have stabbed them. And So I completely agree with that. There's some kind of connection between the victim and the attacker. That's absolutely what it seems like in my personal opinion. This leads me to really think that she had some sort of admirer at the school. Someone that was maybe a freshman as well, someone that maybe was quiet like her. Maybe she had classes with this person. Maybe, it was someone that she saw the few times that she went out in downtown Cobleskill. I start to wonder if they believe that she got in the car with someone it was taking willingly or unwillingly. I personally think it'd be very difficult to take someone unwillingly on that road. There's lots of houses, there's college kids, people a mile down the road, half mile down the road, at bars, outside smoking cigarettes. People are still moving. I feel like there would have been something heard or seen. So it makes me think she got into a car willingly. And while hitchhiking was very common, I think it would be even more likely at that point, had she, even halfway gotten to her destination, if someone was like, oh, hey, I'm in class with you. Don't you remember me? Like I said here, or I don't know if you know me or remember me, but I saw you back at the bar. And she hopped into that person's car. In my opinion, that just seems way more likely. I know that they questioned everyone in the school and said that no one really gave them any red flags or anything like that, but I don't know. I've just got this gut feeling that this was someone that knew her, someone that maybe wanted to be in a relationship with her, was sexually attracted to her, something along those lines, some sort of romantic interest. Maybe when they picked her up, they were expecting to be able to make advances on her, or even if this was just a stranger that went to the school that picked her up and thought she was cute and wanted to make advances on her. If she denied the advances, I think maybe that could have gone very, very badly. Because her shoes were found the way they were along the road, I'm wondering if maybe this person that picked her up could have, been like, oh, I've just got to, go here real quick before I drop you off, or maybe veered off to go in an opposite direction and they needed to get somewhere where the car wouldn't be seen. And so that's why they went to kind of this back road in the country. And I'm wondering, again, because of the way the shoes were placed, if she tried to escape, if they tried to attack her, and she got out and tried to run, and that's why one shoe was off on the road here and the other shoe was over here. And then maybe this person caught up to her and was very overwhelmed with anger that she, first of all, had denied them, second of all, was running. And think about it at this point, if you have just attacked someone and tried to make sexual advances or sexually assault them and they're running, this person could have been like, oh crap, no one, if she gets away, people are going to know that I did this to her. So what if they then attacked her to silence her out of this like extreme moment of rage and fear, and then immediately was like, what have I just done? And this is why she was placed neatly on the wall and she was covered up. They felt shame. They felt guilt because it never should have gone that far. But that also brings me again back to the two knives. Why would this person have used two knives? And so then I start to wonder, could there have been two attackers? Now, I don't know if where her body was found is where they believe she was killed, or if they believe she was killed somewhere else and kind of transferred to this location. I know that from what I've seen, her lower half of her body where her clothes were missing, I don't think authorities have ever found that, which leads me to believe someone tried to sexually assault her in a car and maybe all of that was left in the car. But what if there were two people that picked her up and they knew they'd be able to overpower her as best as they could, and they tried, and she managed to escape. Again, she's running on foot. What if the first person in the car, tries to stop her from getting out, stabs her a few times with his knife? She takes off running to try to escape. Keep in mind, she's probably booking it. She doesn't care if her shoes are flying off, and she's not going to go back and get them. She's in the middle of nowhere, in a town she's not familiar with, in the dark, with potentially 1 to 2 people coming after her. And then what if the second person comes up with his knife or her knife and finishes the job? That would explain the two different weapons that were used. And then maybe at this point they just hopped in the car and fled and disposed of the evidence that was still in the car, which would have been the rest of her clothing. I don't know, you guys. I personally think that this to me does not scream serial killer. I think it's possible Hopkins was involved, but I don't know. The way the body was, I just have this really big feeling that it was someone that killed out of panic, someone that had never done it before, someone that freaked out, maybe two people that freaked out. It was kind of like an in the moment sexual assault that they didn't intend on ending in murdering someone. Maybe if there were two people involved, one of them felt absolutely horrific about it, and that person is who laid her down. You see that a lot when you see two people that kind of commit crimes together. Sometimes one of them just is not on the same page as the other and ends up feeling way more guilt. And that would explain why no one has said anything, because if there's two people, both of them don't want to get caught. So one is going to probably threaten the other if they are feeling guilty and wanting to speak. So I don't know. I think it's very possible it's one killer or two killers, and I honestly believe it was someone in that town. I believe it could also be maybe an individual person that had some sort of romantic interest in her, and it just really, really went wrong. As of right now, the current investigator is Dave Ayers, and he is still working on the case as much as he possibly can. He has taken over the Facebook page, and the Facebook page was actually originally started by another investigator working on the case named Tom Chaffee. Tom Chaffee also donated billboards to help raise exposure on her case. I think there's one along the highway near where she was found on the eastbound and westbound side. So the investigators have really done a lot to kind of go above and beyond to keep this case alive, knowing that there's no one else really out there to do it for her. As I said, unfortunately, her parents passed away, having absolutely no idea what happened to her. Whoever did this got to continue on with their life, unless it was Hopkins who ended his life. But they got to do that while her family literally lost the entirety of their world, their only daughter, completely stripped away from them. I could not imagine what that feels like. And I hope this is one of those cases that ends up eventually being solved. Typically in cases like this, you hope that DNA does something, genealogy, but it doesn't seem that there is any of that, at least that it's been stated publicly by authorities. So I honestly don't know what it will take to solve this. Maybe someone coming forward. I have no idea, but I definitely think it was someone closer to home. Let me know what you guys think down below. As always, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to Kathy's story. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Howlin' fam. Also, any information you need to submit a tip is also linked down below. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, guys. I will see you in my next video. Bye.